Welcome to Artistic Adventures. We're going to complete our porcelain doll rehab project today, making the male doll's clothes, and then we'll get a final look at our two dolls together. Okay, first of all, I'm going to make a shirt for the little boy doll. It's going to be a little white cotton shirt. This is the back piece, and then these two uh, other pieces are for the front. Now I'm going to go ahead and hem the front seams so that that will be the opening of the shirt and we'll be able to get it on and off the doll. Now after we have those two done, we can attach them to the back, putting the right sides together. Now the first thing I'm going to do is the seam of the uh, side of the collar and the shoulder, and I'm doing that because I have to think about what I have to hem, and I have to hem the end of the sleeve, and I don't want to have to hem it as it's with it sewed together. So I'm going to go ahead and hem it with it open, and that just makes it a whole lot easier. So you kind of have to think about these things as you're sewing and what procedure you're going to do next. So once I have both seams, now I can hem the collar and just turn that down. And I'm going to put a little scarf around his neck, so this is going to be a little stand-up collar. And now I can sew the inside of the sleeve seam, the underarm, and down the side of the shirt. I'll do that on both sides. And then once we finish that, we can hem the bottom of the shirt. That's the bottom right there. So we're going to hem that, and then that shirt is pretty much finished. Although I did have to, well, after I turned the sleeves and everything, I did have to put a couple clips in the underarm seam just so it would lay right and not bunch up under the arm. So you have to take that into account when you're doing it. And these clothes are so small that uh, when you turn them and look at them, you don't want them to be bunched up. All right, so there's our little shirt with the stand-up collar, and we'll be putting that on the doll a little bit later. But we're going to move on to the pants right now. And first of all, I'm sewing the front seam of the front part of the pants, and I sew that all the way down. Now for the back seam on the back part of the pants, I'm only going to sew halfway down to the end of the crotch area. And we're going to leave that top part open, and that'll be the opening where we get to have a place to put the doll in and out and have it go over the hips of the doll. Although this doll is pretty much one dimension all the way from the shoulders to the hips, so it doesn't really matter. Now the other thing I'm doing right now is I'm putting some gathering seams in the bottom of the legs, and I ended up taking those out later. I realized that just didn't work the way I wanted it to. So just disregard that. I did put those in there and I left the strings hanging down. But on the side seam, I left about 3/4 of an inch at the bottom open, and that's so we can put a band around it after we gather it and make it, look like knickers. And now we're going to sew the inside seam of the legs, and that'll complete the major structure of the pants. I like this sort of fake suede material. It worked really well for this. Now after we turn it, we're going to put a waistband on. So there's our pants before the waistband. And I made use of the fold on these drapes of this fake suede material and I cut a piece out that was part of the fold so I didn't have to worry about folding it. It stayed in a nice fold while I was sewing it. Now I'm sewing the right side of the waistband to the right side of the front of the pants, and then I clip off the end of that so that I have a little bit left overhanging, so we'll have a piece that folds over on the back. And now we're going to take our waistband and flip it over to the inside, and then I'm going to hand sew this part because I don't want the seam to show on the outside. So what I'm doing is folding over the ends, and then I'll fold the waistband over and sew it right to the seam. So you can see here I'm sewing it to the inner seam so you don't see it on the outside. And just doing some loose stitches around there to hold it in place. And I'll end up finishing this up off camera. It's so much easier for me to sew with my hand like this when I can hold it closer. All right, so I lost a little bit of footage. Not sure what happened, but I did complete his shirt and sew it to the front of him. And then I made this little vest. It's made out of fleece, like sweatpants material type, sweatshirt material. But I used the inside as the right side. That's because it looks more like it's knitted on that side, the fleecy side, as opposed to the front that looks smooth. And then I took some thin polyester material in green to make his necktie. And I'm using these colors because the color in the girl doll's dress had some green and sort of a cranberry red color in it. And we used those pretty carnelian beads also on her dress. So these colors will tie in the look of the boy and the girl doll and make it look like they're brother and sister, maybe twins dressed up, to look somewhat alike. So I'm using a paintbrush in here to turn my scarf or necktie. And once I get that turned, you can use the paintbrush again to go back up in there and make sure that the points of the corner at the end are fully turned and make it look like right angles as opposed to being rounded. All right, and then I'm taking the open end, folding the ragged edges inside of the tube and putting a little bit of E6000 inside, and then I'm going to hold it together to glue it together so I don't have to sew it and have the seam show on the outside, so it'll look like it's invisibly sewn. All right, so that we'll set aside to dry for a few minutes, and then we'll keep working on the boy doll's pants. So there he is. I went ahead and put the pants on him. There's his little waistband. It turned out good. And over the back where I had that overlap of the waistband, I just sewed it down. If you wanted to, you could have put a snap on it if you want to take these pants on and off. And then we're just pulling the little sweater vest down on top of the pants. And now that our scarf is dry, we're just going to tie it around his neck in a loose knot. I almost gave him a bow tie, but at the end I thought this would look, I don't know, less formal, maybe. More like a muffler kind of look. And I did actually end up having to put some glue under the sides to glue it down so that it would stay down. It just kept wanting to stick up in the air. So I feel free to use your E6000 in these emergency situations. You can see it's kind of sticking up. So anyway, I put some glue on it and let it stay glued overnight because I got to a point where I just couldn't sew anymore. And look at this. This morning I went and got the cast off. I have a couple scars there and a bruise, and that's the biggest scar right there. It's still a little tender and not fully as strong as it was, but yay, that thing is off of my hand, and from now on, things are looking up, and we can get back into some more advanced videos. So here are those little strings I put the gathers in. I'm just pulling those out. That ended up not working the way I wanted it to. I wanted it to be evenly gathered, and that just wasn't going to do it with it being sewn on two different pieces. So I'm just going to go back in with needle and thread, and by hand I'm going to start at one side of the leg there at the opening and just run a gathering stitch around the very bottom of each of the legs of the pants. And once you get it measured to where it fits around the leg, then you can tie a knot so the gathers won't come out. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. This method just allowed me to get more even gathers completely all the way around the legs instead of having it just bunched up in the front and back, which is how it was looking with with the other technique that I was using. If I'd put a gathering stitch in the complete leg, it would have worked, but I didn't think about doing that at the time. So just making sure that I have the gathers even and that there's enough of them to go all the way around the leg before you tie it off. And now we're going to make use of some more of that folded over material to do the cuff on the knickers. So they had actually been glued together previously so that they stay together. And now what we're going to do is glue one end to the back side of the opening. And I'm going to let that dry before I try to glue the rest of that cuff down because it'll just make it a lot easier if I don't have to worry about that coming loose. So set that aside and let it dry. And once it's dry, then I sort of measure it around to make sure I have the length and everything where I want it. And then I'm going to put glue on that inside of the cuff. And then it's pretty easy to just fold it over and make the cuff overlap onto the part onto the other side. And then I'm just going to put a little dab of glue onto the part that overlapped at the seam and put one of my little small buttons on there so it looks like the cuff is buttoned at the side. So that turned out cute. So there's our little boy doll. I did paint his socks and shoes off camera. They looked pretty ragged when I first got him. And now he's completely finished. He's got his little outfit. He's got his cap, his new hair, his new face. He's completely redone. So here he is standing up. And then here's our little girl doll from the previous video that we did. And I did add a little red ribbon to her hair. Here you can see them together. I think the colors turned out looking really great when you look at them as a couple. So that's the end of the porcelain project. Our next project is going to be a Korean doll. I had a suggestion to do that. So look forward to sharing that video with you, and I hope you will subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and bye.